Welcome back to Judo Breakdowns, your source for judo commentary on the internet. And what I have for you today is something a little different. Instead of going through a match, which is what this channel normally does, you'll notice I've been on a bit of a brief hiatus, trying to figure out what this channel is going to do. And in the meantime, I've just been noticing something on the internet that I thought, maybe I should weigh in on this. And that's going to be the topic for today, which is self-defense, and specifically martial arts for self-defense, and why I think judo should be number one on the list of martial arts for self-defense. There are many other channels that over the past, 6-8 months have weighed in on this topic. You're very common to see tier listings, going through every martial art, every combat thing, even MMA, which unsurprisingly, my Windows, unsurprisingly is, it's showing up as very high, MMA and the likes. And I have a bit of a different take on it that I thought I would share. But before I get into that, I think one of my gripes with this question and the way it's been answered, the question is fine actually, but the way it's been answered is really what I don't like to see is a lack of definition. So let's start with definitions here and what I personally mean by self-defense. So you could have your own definition, that's fine, but at least you'll understand. Pardon me. At least you'll understand what I mean by self-defense. So we'll start actually with what I believe is the true purpose of self-defense, which is to minimize your bodily harm. Okay? This is a very important thing to define. So the purpose of self-defense really is to make sure that you are the least damaged coming out of any encounter, right? And so what does that mean for what counts as self-defense? It's really anything that is done to minimize bodily harm, right? A lot of people will say self-awareness, de-escalation, all that falls in within the broad envelope of anything like, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right, boxing. All of that would fall underneath the very, very broad umbrella of anything permissible within self-defense. But so self-defense can mean a lot of things, right? Even being in a very large group of people is a form of self-defense, right? One thing I have to emphasize is that self-defense is not street fighting, right? So what I mean is, and this is where I think a lot of the videos don't sort of stray into, is talking about the martial art in almost like caged combat type of scenario, or, where the purpose is not necessarily to minimize your bodily damage. So I'll give you two examples here of situations. One is here, you end up killing someone in self-defense, but you lose an eye in the process. Now, fair game. I mean, if you had to kill them, you had to kill them, and if you had to lose an eye, okay, fine. It is what it is. But if we contrast that with say, the same situation but very different outcome, where you get punched in the face, but that's it. The other person didn't get touched at all, but that's the end of it. Now, in situation A, you may say, well, you won the encounter, and you did, right? Maybe it's a bit of a Pyrrhic victory, but it's still a victory nonetheless. And in situation B, you might say you lost. You ran out, you ran away. You got punched in the face, and the other person is untouched. So you're the loser, quote unquote, the loser in this situation. But in my perspective, situation B is far more preferable of an outcome. Because you've taken a punch. Yeah, it's going to cause a certain amount of damage. Maybe not great, but it's certainly not losing an eye. Or Anyways, you understand what I'm saying. Right? So from one perspective, you could say, okay, well, situation A, you've won. So whatever that was is better, right? But I much prefer situation B. I'd rather lose and then not take a whole bunch of whatever to quote unquote win. If I can preserve myself or people that I'm protecting, right? The other thing that I have to talk about is that we have to be realistic about the real world here. Okay, self defense encounter situations, they're not movies. Okay, so number one, John Wick is not real life. Okay, you punch someone in the face, you imagine knocking them out. Okay, what happens is that you might have broken a bone or two in that hand, or multiple bones, small bones, uh, to punch someone, and maybe that's not so glamorous to talk about, but bare knuckle fighting is like that for a reason, right? Boxers don't have giant gloves to make it nice and soft on the opponent. It's for to protect their own hands, right? So, uh, self-defense situations are really difficult, right? And doing whatever you see on screen is much harder in real life. And to point number two, any encounter in self-defense is extremely dangerous. Uh, you know, you want to be in that time period of an encounter as minimally as possible. Like this needs to be over now, right? So if you imagine it being like a exponential curve, that's the level of danger as time increases, right? And the reasons are, you're getting more tired, right? Your adrenaline is petering out. Your ability to end the encounter is worsening, right? Maybe the person you're fighting with, they've got some reinforcements on the way. They've got their buddies or someone else is coming in intervening that might not really know who's right and wrong, but maybe you'll be catching the bad side of that, right? And the other reason why it gets so dangerous is because just the amount of like strikes or techniques landed on you, it's going to do more damage to you, right? So the more you're in it, you take uh, one punch, that's one thing. But if you take 20 punches, um, that can only happen over a more extended time period, right? So that's what I wanted to say about that, right? The other thing is in self defense, let's be real here, okay? An unarmed person versus an armed person, let's not, there's no point in talking about it, right? Like, someone's got a gun, I don't care what you're doing, I'm going with the guy with the gun, all right? Like 99.9999% of the time. Even with a knife, a real knife situation, so dangerous. It's crazy dangerous, okay? That anyone that encourages you that okay, this is good for a knife to like dealing with knives, it's not okay. Like it's so dangerous to engage with anyone with that's armed. Let's not delude ourselves in terms of how effective any of these things will be. A boxer, well trained boxer against a guy with a knife. It's not a movie, guys, right? So let's be real. Okay, so we're not talking about that situation. And number four, this is not pit fighter, okay, or even cage fighting. Where okay, you know, running away is great, but what happens when it's just you versus another guy and you can't escape, and then so you're forced to fight? It's like okay, like this is not a real self-defense situation. This is a movie again that we're talking about here. Or if it's not a movie, then it's really just street fighting, right? And you're voluntarily entering into these violent encounters. Okay, street fighting is its own thing, separate from self-defense. Self-defense, you don't want to be part of it. It's good to get out of there. So okay, so why does any of this matter? uh, talking about these points, it really helps to drive the criteria for how I look at these martial arts with respect to self defense, right? And those would be number one, escaping, right? Uh, Nothing better than not getting in a fight, not getting into a self defense encounter, right? Self awareness, all that stuff, that's great. Even preventative, you're in a big group, whatever. You're in the police. Those are going to be great. But if you are in a situation, in an encounter, your ability to escape will unlock the ability to run away, right? So that's one of my key criteria. Is two, urgency. As I said before, these situations are extremely dangerous, and so as a martial art emphasizes urgency, that is a very big criteria for me. If you're just hanging around or you're not incentivized to end it faster, then the applicability in self-defense situations is worsened. Right? And number three, damage prevention, mitigation, reduction. Right? In a real self-defense situation, things are flying the first line. Even if you're not trying to fight, right? You might run, you might trip, you might slip on something. Okay, how has this martial art prepared you to reduce the damage or mitigate it or prevent it, right? And in what ways? So those are my main criteria. And again, right, this is not street fighting, right? We're not trying to prove who's the baddest dude on the planet, right? Right. I don't care about ego and pride. Oh, you look bad in front of your friends or your wife or girlfriend or whatever. Or I don't care. Okay, it's self-defense, right? We're trying to preserve your body here, right? So it's not a relevant factor. And in my ideal scenario, outside of just never getting into a situation, is that you disengage as fast as possible and you maximally reduce damage from whatever they're doing, be it they're throwing a strike, they're trying to toss you into the ground, or whatever they're trying to do. If you can get out of there fast and minimize whatever they've done, then that's the best situation you can get outside of not being there, obviously. Okay, so how are we going to evaluate this? This is also important, right? So, well, I have to stipulate a few things. One is every martial art is different. They are practiced differently. Even the same martial art is practiced differently between countries and cities, and even at the club level. Everyone does things in their own way. This is all just a very broad generalization. Obviously, we're not going to spend time, and I don't have the information to break it down at that granular detail, right? So, if you have a comment where you say, well, this person does this or that does that, it's like, okay, and in this country they do this. Cool. Okay, yeah, I mean, that's fine. But we're talking about it at the 50,000 foot view, right? There's also, we have to talk about the scope, really, of the martial art, right? And because if you were to really crack it open, the overlap of some of these, it's almost, some of them are literally identical, right? Like, it just really doesn't make any sense then to talk about it, because there's so many of them that have so much overlap that it really is. If you talk about it at sort of that holistic level, where we talk about the full scope of the martial art, you're really not going to derive any differences. It's really going to be sort of difficult to sort of differentiate, right? So, how are we going to look at it? We're going to look at it more as the competitive view of the martial art. How is that martial art turned into competitive? Because that's really how most clubs operate within a driving competitive scene that put certain techniques above others, that instruction is taught in a certain way, right? So sport is, of course, not the martial art. Let's okay, but we have to talk about okay. If you were to tell someone go into this martial art for self defense, how are they going to experience that martial art? They're not going to experience it from a textbook. Okay, here are all the strikes that are in judo that nobody does. Like, okay, cool. Yeah, right. Like, that's not. And so then that it basically is a big not applicable, right? Okay. And I have to emphasize this is only in my opinion. Okay. So if you have a different opinion, I encourage it. Please let me know. But if you really think that I'm off base, I'm more than happy to hear it. Um, but this is, again, only my opinion. Don't be too angry at me for what is ultimately just a personal opinion. Okay, so let's get into the meat of it. How does it fare? How do the martial arts fare in general? Let's start with the striking martial arts. So boxing, kickboxing, karate, taekwondo, kung fu, etc., etc., etc. It goes on and on, right? And I'm lumping all of these into one big group. So um, mostly because I think here this is a tough one for me. In the realm of escaping, they're prioritizing engagement and not disengagement, right? And what I mean is that if you get like anyone can, if you're in a position to kick someone, you're in a position to run. Okay, so but the martial art is sort of going against what you really need to be doing. All your training is basically irrelevant then at that point in terms of uh, applicability in self defense, right? Again, we're not talking about pit fighting here. Okay, we're talking about self defense. So you're gonna throw a kick or you're gonna run. I'm gonna run, right? So this is a pretty huge one for me. Okay, the next is urgency. I really think that most bouts are not knockout based, right? They're mostly point fighting and getting points, and that's going to lead to protracted bouts, right? You're not going, like, most people are not going to be knockout artists. Most really competitive people are knockout artists, really, right? So, and unless you're just sucker punching someone, it's very difficult to knock out somebody in real life. And that's in controlled settings, right? And in uncontrolled settings, real life settings, you might be in a bar, you might be dark lighting, etc., etc. Knockout is tough. So your ability to really end things quickly is not there, or is very difficult to achieve, and so most people don't train that way, right? To really like just go for the one punch knockout, right? So, or that's not even that much of a thing. Okay, and the next is really damage prevention. I think from a strike, you know, obviously the striking martial arts are going to be the best at this, right? They're going to, as a group, be able to block and or slip punches and kicks the best, and that's not nothing. That is very important. But grappling, I'm not moved by their ability to prevent or mitigate or reduce damage from any grappling submission, throw, hold down. The martial art itself is got a big zero on that side, right? So in total, I group all striking martial arts is very bad for self defense. Remember, this is not pit fighting, but for self defense, you're not getting out of there fast, right? If you were to picture it and you say, okay, let's just take my coworker at work, and she's like a 110-pound person, and she goes to me, it's like, I really want to do self defense. What about all this stuff with like groin strikes or like whatever, eye pokes or boxing and so on? It's like, yeah, you can do it. I mean, sure, go for it, but like, you know, you think you're really gonna knock someone out, right? You think that you're just gonna groin strike somebody with when they got a hand around your neck, they got a hand on your lapel or your sleeve. It's not that easy. Not that easy, right? It's not life's not a movie, right? As I said, so self defense situations, I would almost like never advise that, right? I mean, you could in like sort of extreme situations, but not not really good advice in my perspective. Okay, so we're just gonna jump to the conclusion here. I think judo is number one for self defense, and it's really up against the other grappling martial arts for top spot, right? So judo's the best, number one. Why? Break falls. One of the a key one here. Break falls is a huge part of damage reduction, mitigation, um, and we talk a lot about like how most fights end on the ground, blah 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 or whatever. Okay, cool. You want to talk about how you got to the ground? Someone shot a double leg, or you slipped, or someone shoved you from behind, or someone tripped you, or you know, or you sort of tussled with someone and then you rolled to the ground. Okay, you're landing on pavement. Cool. That landing is not gonna be without penalty. It's gonna suck, right? And to learn how to make that suck the least, break falls are so important, right? And totally underrated aspect of self defense. Totally under discussed. Wrestling, BJJ, MMA. There's really not break falls that are done really at a very serious level. BJJ maybe depends on your club, but at a competitive thing, why? There's no benefit really, right? So competitive BJJ doesn't require taking good break falls, right? Because it's not really incentivized that direction, right? Aikido, I said, gets half credit here. They do have break falls, quote unquote break falls. I think they're okay. I mean, it's not nothing, but it's not, let's say, full force. Someone's trying to get ippon type of throwing speed and power, right? So Aikido, yeah, there is some motion of a break fall. I also think that the Aikido break fall is a little bit mistimed, right? I don't agree with the way that they're landing the break fall, but okay, that's my own personal quibble. But yeah, break falls, so important for damage mitigation. Cannot emphasize that enough. And judo emphasizes it a lot, probably the most out of everything. Sambo probably also does break falls pretty well. Okay, the next aspect, grip fighting, kumikata, right? Breaking the grip. How are you going to get out of something if you can't break the grip, right? Breaking grip is so important. Someone's got their hands on you. You need to get out of there. If you can't break their grip, well, guess what? You're not getting out of there. Not unless your shirt rips or your jacket rips or someone else intervenes. If you can't break that grip, then good luck, right? And judo, as part of the competitive aspect of it, although I don't love it, it is a big part of it. And we have to recognize that skill set, and we think about it as like skill sets that sort of get fostered from practicing competitive martial arts, will translate in a self-defense situation. It doesn't necessarily translate. Some things don't necessarily translate in self-defense situations, but kumikata does, right? So learning to break grips really helps you get yourself to freedom and to safety, right? So that's the goal there, right? And the last one, urgency. Judo, where, as we all know, instant victory conditions, submission and throwing, or very fast hold downs are also very incentivized. So I think Sambo's a little bit, just a touch behind judo. I mean, Sambo's very close to being just as good as judo. And, in some ways it's really almost like 1A, 1B type of thing. But still, I'm going to put judo number one. Mostly because Sambo doesn't have the same sense of urgency because the point system that they have really accumulates as opposed to it's over, right? So with judo, it's not unheard of for it to be over in a split second, and then that's it. That's all she wrote, right? So um, those are really my main points to it, right? As I'd like to just wrap up and say, self defense is not cage fighting, it's not street fighting, it's not pit fighting, it's not ego based. It's about saving your body, minimizing damage, and trying to um, trying to see a better day, right, for yourself. Right, self defense situations are so dangerous that that's really. I mean, it's sort of grim, but life's not a movie, right? So like, you gotta know that it's always going to be tough to get away unscathed. Is like, okay, come on, what are we talking about here? Like, that's not a real situation, right? So, um, those are my thoughts on judo as a self defense. You know, definitely there's going to be people that vehemently disagree with me, especially from other martial arts. Maybe the Aikido guys are going to all scream at me. I don't know. Go ahead, like that's fine. Like I like to hear it. Why they really think that you know certain X martial arts is better or Y martial arts is better. But I don't want to hear it about mono e mono street fighting style, or street fights or whatever. Okay, that's not my purpose here. I think I very clearly defined my terms. But within what I've said, if you've got a position that I haven't considered or more things to think about, I'm all ears. For sure, I'd like to understand. So those are my thoughts. I know this is quite a long video for me, but if you have any of your own, please leave a comment, as I've been trying to emphasize. If you enjoyed this video, hit like, subscribe, and until next time, have a great night.